I keep telling myself I'll stop asking, but every time I'm at her place and the night dips past that hour where silence starts to feel intentional, something in me pushes again, gently, almost politely, like I'm trying to convince myself that the way her eyes soften when she's tired must mean something more than exhaustion. I don't phrase it the same way each time. Sometimes it's just a question about staying a little longer, or a half-formed suggestion that hangs in the air like a thread she could tug if she wanted. Sometimes I make it a joke, quiet, quick, something I can deny if she takes it too seriously. Sometimes I let my hand linger on her arm a beat past what's friendly, as if time itself will notice before she does. And every time she turns me down, not cruelly, not even firmly, just in that calm, habitual way that feels practiced, like she's folding a shirt along familiar lines. She says it's not the right time, or she's tired, or she has an early day tomorrow. But it's the way she says it that stays with me. The slight upward lilt, hopeful almost, like she needs me to understand she's not rejecting me as a person, just the moment. I always pretend I understand. I tell her it's fine. She smiles like she's relieved. And then she walks me to the door even though she doesn't have to, leaning her shoulder against the frame, saying good night in that soft, patient voice that makes everything sting twice as much. I step out into the hallway, pretending I don't notice the faint slump of her posture when she closes the door, like the act of refusing me drains her more than it drains me. The walk to my car is always quiet. The air feels heavier around her building, like the night settles differently there, slower. I replay everything as I drive, the way she tucked her hair behind her ear when I asked, that little distracted gesture she does when she's thinking through what she wants to say. I tell myself I'm studying her because I care, not because I want control over anything. I don't want control. I just want clarity. But clarity always feels 1 inch out of reach with her, like she wraps her real feelings in that warm, careful tone she uses on everyone she wants to keep close without letting too close. I keep hearing her say that line from months ago, said offhand in that same apartment, feet up on the couch, scrolling through her phone while I talked nonsense about some girl I'd dated briefly. She laughed and told me, I won't be one of those girls who abandons her friends for a guy. She sounded proud of it, like it was a promise she made to herself, a rule she lived by. I think maybe that's why I believed there was space for me, that she'd keep me close no matter what. Maybe I confused proximity with possibility. Maybe I heard what I wanted to hear. Every night I leave her place, I feel that same tightness in my chest, a mix of frustration and something else I don't want to name because naming it would make it too real. It's not rage. It's not jealousy. It's more like a subtle thinning of patience, a quiet erosion of whatever part of me used to take her refusals as just refusals rather than signals, patterns, pieces of a larger thing I haven't fully understood yet. I watch her small behaviors more than I mean to. The way she chews on her lip when she's about to say no. The way her fingers tap against her thigh, rhythmic, almost soothing, like she's comforting herself. The way she inhales like she's bracing for impact even though I've never pushed her, not really, not yet. I tell myself I respect her boundaries, and I do, technically. I've never forced anything. I've never argued when she said no. I've never stayed after she made it clear she was done for the night. But there's a difference between respecting the boundary and accepting it, and I don't think I've accepted anything. Not honestly. I don't think she realizes how much space she occupies in my head when I'm walking back to my car, replaying the exact tone of her voice, the tilt of her head, the tiny half-smile she uses to soften the blow. It's almost gentle, the way she rejects me, and sometimes that makes it worse. If she were harsh, I could hate her for it. If she were distant, I could move on. But she's warm, she's kind, she's familiar, and the softness makes her refusals feel temporary, like she just needs more time. I'm tired of telling myself that lie, but I can't stop. Not yet. The truth is, there's something hypnotic about the ritual. I ask, she declines, I leave. Each iteration feels heavier, like a string pulling tight between us. I know she feels it too, even if she doesn't say it. There's a flicker in her eyes sometimes, a hesitation, like she's weighing something unspoken. I don't know what it is, but I can tell it's there. She's not indifferent. She's careful. And careful people always have reasons. I don't ask what they are. I pretend I don't care. But every night I catch myself studying the way she leans away slightly when I get too close, not enough to be rude, just enough to create that thin layer of space that keeps me guessing. She doesn't seem afraid, just cautious, like she knows letting me in would shift something she isn't ready to shift. Or maybe she just doesn't want me. That should be the simplest answer. But it isn't, not with her. With her, everything has edges I can't see. I think the fascination started long before the frustration did. She has this particular way of looking at people, curious but reserved, like she's cataloguing them quietly, matching their words to their expressions, their habits to their intentions. I used to think she saw me clearly, that she knew me better than most people do. But lately I've been wondering if she only sees what she wants to see, and everything deeper just slides past her unnoticed. Or maybe she notices too much. Maybe she can sense the shift in me before I can admit it to myself. There's a kind of resentment forming, slow and thin, like a crack in glass. Not big enough to break anything, just visible enough to catch the light when I tilt my thoughts toward it. I resent the way she makes me feel hopeful without giving me any real reason to be. I resent how she keeps me close, but not close enough. I resent how she looks at me with that soft, almost affectionate warmth right before she tells me no. But mostly I resent myself for staying in this loop, for lingering at her doorway even when I know exactly how the night will end. I tell myself each time will be different, and she tells me each time it won't, and neither of us breaks the pattern. It feels like we're rehearsing something, but neither of us says the lines out loud. Tonight was the same. I asked. She declined. She gave me that little apologetic smile that makes her look younger, like she's trying to make up for something she doesn't think she did wrong. I nodded, made some joke about how rejection builds character. She laughed politely. I stepped out. She said good night. I said good night. The door clicked shut with that soft, final sound that always hits harder than I expect. And now I'm here typing this, watching the clock push closer to 4 a.m., wondering how many times I can repeat the same ritual before something shifts. I don't mean something dramatic or violent or cinematic. Nothing like that. I just mean something quiet. Something internal. A recalibration. A decision I haven't made yet, but I can feel it forming, slow and steady, like the way you realize a storm is coming long before you hear the thunder. It's not anger. It's not bitterness. It's just the sense that eventually, one of us won't play our part in the pattern anymore. Maybe her, maybe me. And I'm starting to think the moment that happens will feel less like a loss and more like a release. I didn't notice when the shift started, only that one night I realized I no longer left her place feeling the same kind of raw frustration I used to carry. It dulled into something steadier, quieter, like the static hum of a refrigerator in the next room that you don't hear until it stops. I think it happened gradually, a slow accumulation of half-formed thoughts, observations I didn't mean to gather, impressions I didn't intend to keep. It wasn't deliberate. It didn't feel like crossing a line. It felt like leaning into a pattern that was already there, one she had created without knowing it. When you spend enough time around someone, you start to absorb the rhythms of their life, the small unconscious routines that reveal more than anything they ever say out loud. I started noticing how predictable she was, not in a boring way but in the way a pendulum is predictable. She moved through her apartment the same way every evening, drifting from one corner to another with that soft, distracted focus she always had when she was tired. She'd kick off her shoes before she even locked the door, drop her bag on the table, and then pull her hair up with that slow, absent gesture that made her neck look strangely defenseless. I never studied these things on purpose. They just accumulated in my mind the way dust settles on surfaces you don't touch. She had a certain pace to her evenings. She always dimmed the lights around the same time, not all at once, but gradually, as if shutting down in layers. She wore the same oversized sweater when she was cold, the one with the slightly frayed cuff she kept meaning to fix. She always paused in the kitchen before bed, leaning her hip against the counter while sipping water like she was waiting for something to happen. I think she had no idea how much she repeated herself. Most people don't. Repetition is comforting when you're the one doing it. It's only when you're on the outside, watching, that it turns into something revealing. I didn't write any of this down, not formally. It wasn't like I kept notes or logs or anything that concrete. It was more like the details clung to me on their own, uninvited, but impossible to drop. A gesture here, a tone there, a faint pattern in how she spoke when she was hiding something. I knew the time she usually woke up because my phone buzzed with her morning meme shares, always around the same minute, like her humor was synced to her alarm clock. I knew her late-night moods from the way her texts shifted from playful to vague. She wasn't unpredictable. She wasn't unreadable. She was consistent. And consistency creates shape. Shape creates understanding. Understanding creates fixation, not obsession, not the unhealthy kind people talk about in dramatic metaphors. Mine was softer, quieter, something that settled under my skin like cool water. It didn't feel wrong. It felt inevitable. I stopped asking her out as often, not because I accepted anything, but because I wanted to see what she would do if the pattern broke on my side. She didn't do much. She didn't fill the space I left. She just carried on, maybe relieved, maybe oblivious, maybe both. She still invited me over sometimes, still leaned against the doorframe when I left, still used that warm voice when she turned me down. But there was something different in her eyes, a slight alertness, like she sensed a shift but didn't know where it came from. It wasn't fear, just awareness. Attention like the air before rain. The more I noticed her routine, the more I started seeing the gaps in it. The moments where her comm slipped. The way she would glance over her shoulder in her apartment as if expecting someone to be standing there, even though she lived alone. Or the way she'd check her phone twice before responding to a message, her thumb hesitating over the screen like she was rehearsing her tone. Sometimes she would laugh at something I said and then immediately look down, almost guilty. I couldn't tell if she was afraid of leading me on or afraid of herself. I didn't press. Pressing would have broken the quiet, and the quiet was where everything made sense. I found myself thinking about her at odd times of the day, not with longing anymore but with a strange curiosity. I wondered how she moved through her mornings, whether she was one of those people who sat in silence while she brushed her teeth or one of those who filled the room with noise just to avoid thinking. I wondered how she looked when she woke up, not in a romantic way, but in an observational way, like trying to imagine the exact moment her face shifted from sleep to consciousness. I wondered how often she checked the time when she was alone, whether she preferred clocks or phone screens, whether she drifted through her day or marched through it. Small, pointless questions, but they didn't feel pointless when I asked them. They felt like clues, pieces of a puzzle that wasn't actually a puzzle, just a person trying to exist. But once you start noticing pieces, it's hard not to keep collecting them. I began spacing out my visits, creating distance in a way that felt deliberate even though I never said it out loud. She didn't question it. She didn't chase. That told me something too. She was comfortable with absence, maybe even relieved by it. But she still kept me close in her own way. She still sent me random links, still asked about my day, still told me she missed hanging out even though she never made plans herself. The contradiction didn't bother me. It clarified her. She liked me in a controlled, manageable way. I fit neatly into a compartment she had labeled safe friend or familiar presence, a constant she could access on her schedule. I don't think she realized that constancy works both ways. That when someone keeps you close, but not close enough, it creates a friction that wears at the edges of things. I felt that wear. I don't know if she did, but I saw signs. A little stiffness in her laugh sometimes. A flicker in her eyes when I said her name too softly. A habit of rubbing her wrist when the room got too quiet. I never tested her. I never crossed boundaries. I never tried to corner her or make her uncomfortable. But I can't pretend I didn't see more than she meant for me to see. She had tells, subtle ones. The way she paused before unlocking her door as if centering herself. The way she closed her laptop slowly when I arrived unexpectedly, like she needed a second to shift personas. The way her shoulders stiffened for the briefest moment when I stepped too close before stepping away. I didn't comment on any of it. I didn't need to. Observing was enough. Letting the details settle was enough. There was something soothing about knowing her patterns, like watching a candle flicker in a drafty room. You don't need to touch the flame to understand how it moves. You just sit and watch and let the rhythm sink in. Sometimes I'd think about that night she said she wouldn't abandon her friends for a guy. It echoed in my head in a way I couldn't shake. I realized slowly that she'd built her entire identity around not losing herself to someone else. And I wondered, late at night when my thoughts drifted too easily, whether that fear of losing herself was the real barrier, not me, not timing, not compatibility. I wondered whether she was keeping me at a distance not because she didn't want me, but because she didn't trust herself to handle it if she did. That idea fascinated me more than anything. The idea that maybe her refusals weren't rejections, but protective measures, shields, patterns, rituals. I didn't act on that thought. I just let it sit, quiet and heavy, like a stone dropped into a lake. She never asked what had changed between us, even though something clearly had. She felt it, I could tell. People can always feel it when attention shifts from active pursuit to quiet observation. It creates an unease they can't name. Not fear, not suspicion, just a subtle awareness that the air around them has thickened. She began texting less predictably. Sometimes earlier, sometimes later, sometimes not at all. Not because she was distancing herself, but because she had started thinking about the timing of things. When before she sent messages instinctively, now she hesitated. The hesitation told me everything. She felt the quiet. She didn't understand it, but she felt it. And I liked that she felt it. Not in a cruel way, not in a vindictive way, just in the way you like when someone finally senses the weight of something you've been carrying alone. The fixation wasn't about wanting her, not anymore. It was about understanding the shape of whatever existed between us, the push and pull, the repetitions, the silences, the tiny changes that said more than her words ever did. I stopped needing her answers. I stopped needing her explanations. The more I watched, not from a distance, not secretly, just through the simple act of being present, I realized she was more transparent than she believed. And I think, slowly, she began to realize that I saw her more clearly than she was comfortable with. Sometimes she would glance at me with this wary softness, like she was trying to read something on my face she couldn't quite grasp. Sometimes she'd ask if I was okay, but not with concern, more like curiosity, like she was trying to understand why the dynamic felt different without being able to articulate it. I always told her I was fine, and I was. In my own way, the fixation didn't feel sharp or dangerous. It felt calm, controlled, like watching a clock tick in a quiet room. You don't stare because you need the time. You stare because the movement gives you something steady to focus on. I didn't resent her anymore. I didn't hope for anything. I just watched the pattern unfold, understanding her more each day, fitting the pieces together without ever forcing them. And I think she felt the shift most in the moments when I said nothing at all, when I let the silence linger a little longer than before. Silence has a way of revealing things people don't mean to show. And by then, I had grown very comfortable with silence. She woke up later than usual the morning everything finally settled, the kind of late where the sun was already high enough to make her blink against the brightness leaking through the blinds she always forgets to close properly. I wasn't there. Not really, not in any way someone could point to, but I felt the moment she stirred, the way the air seemed to shift around her routine. She moved differently that morning. I could tell without seeing. There was a slowness that didn't match the soft, habitual rhythm she usually carried through her mornings. She sat up and paused, the kind of pause that isn't about tiredness, but about awareness. Like waking into a room you've slept in 100 times, but sensing something slightly wrong with it, something you can't articulate because nothing has actually moved. She rubbed her eyes and looked around in that sleepy, unfocused way she always did, but this time the unfocused part didn't fade when she fully woke. She stayed still a second longer than she normally would have, like she was listening for something. I don't know what she thought she'd hear. People don't expect real noises when they feel watched. They expect the absence of noise, the kind of silence that presses against the walls and makes breathing feel intrusive. She slid out of bed eventually, her feet touching the cold floor with that soft thud I knew by memory alone. She crossed the room and paused again, just briefly, as if she expected to see something out of place, but nothing was. That was the point. Nothing had changed at all, and that's what unsettled her. She'd grown used to routine, to predictability, to knowing how her mornings felt before they even began. But this morning didn't feel like hers. It felt heavier, quieter. I could imagine the way her shoulders tightened near her neck, that small crease forming between her eyebrows the way it always did when she tried to convince herself everything was normal. Normal is such a fragile thing. It doesn't take much to disturb it, not an action, not a confrontation, not a line crossed. Sometimes all it takes is the quiet withdrawal of something you never realized was holding you steady. She walked into the kitchen, that slow drag of her steps, and I could picture her pausing by the counter the way she always did, but instead of reaching for a glass she let her hand hover, uncertain. She wasn't used to uncertainty, she was used to choosing her thoughts before she had them. She never liked when feelings arrived before explanations. She opened her fridge, stared inside for a few seconds, then closed it again without taking anything. Her movements were sharper now, not frantic, but clipped, like she was trying to regain control over a morning that didn't belong to her. She checked her phone next. I knew she would. She always checked her phone around that time, expecting the usual notifications, the early memes, the late-night messages, the little digital threads that tethered her to her world. But the screen was quiet, no messages from me. No small acknowledgement of her existence, no predictable sign of presence. She stared at the phone longer than she would admit. She tried to mask the reaction even from herself, pretending she wasn't waiting for anything. But she was. People say they don't need certain connections until those connections go silent, and then the absence turns into a shape they can't ignore. She put her phone down slowly, like it was something fragile. The morning light touched her face at a faint angle, the kind that makes everything look slightly washed out. She seemed smaller in that moment, not in a pathetic way, but in the way someone looks when they realize how much they'd taken a rhythm for granted. She walked around her apartment with that subtle hesitance, checking nothing in particular, looking at things that had always been there. She wasn't searching for me. That wasn't the kind of story this is. She was searching for something internal, a feeling she thought she could locate if she walked enough circles around her familiar space. That's how people deal with unease. They move until something settles. But nothing settled, not for her. She stood by the window eventually, staring out at the quiet street. The sunlight caught her profile in a way that made the edges feel too sharp, like she didn't fit quite right in the frame of her morning. I watched, not physically, not dangerously, not in any way that could be pointed to or reconstructed. Just the quiet awareness of her shift, the way you can feel someone thinking of you even with oceans between you. She brushed her hair back, with that soft, habitual gesture, but her hand lingered halfway, like the motion faltered. She didn't know why she felt watched. She didn't know why her skin tingled at the back of her neck. She didn't know why the apartment felt slightly colder even though the temperature hadn't changed. She didn't know why the silence felt so thick. People always imagine paranoia as loud, frantic. But it isn't. It arrives quietly, like a temperature drop. She wasn't afraid. Not exactly. Fear has sharp edges. This had none. This was something gentler, more confusing. The kind of sensation that makes you turn your head slowly, not because you heard something but because you felt something. Something off, something missing, something shifted. She checked her door next, not in a panicked rush, but with a slow, thoughtful touch, as if expecting the handle to feel different under her fingers. It didn't. Of course it didn't. Everything was exactly as it had always been. That's what made her uneasy. Had something been moved, something broken, something visibly disturbed, she could have responded, anchored herself, reacted. But nothing had changed except the feeling. She stood in her doorway a long moment, hand resting lightly against the frame the way mine had so many nights. She looked at the empty hallway as if expecting someone to be leaving just then, someone she'd missed by a fraction of a second. Her breath slowed. She stepped back inside and closed the door with a careful push, as if closing it too hard might shatter the thin calm of the room. I could almost feel her mind working, trying to find the source of the shift. She thought about me? Not consciously at first, just a drifting thought, a name rising through the surface of her mind like something warm. She wondered why I hadn't messaged. Wondered if she had said something wrong. Wondered if she'd missed something in my eyes last time we spoke. She replayed the memory the same way I once had, but her interpretation was gentler, less precise. She never noticed details the way I did, but she felt the absence now. People always feel absence more sharply than presence. She sat on her couch eventually, the same spot she always curled into when she felt uncertain. Knees drawn up slightly, hand resting against her cheek, eyes unfocused on a spot across the room. She stayed like that a long time, thinking, searching inward, breathing too carefully. The apartment was quiet, not the peaceful kind of quiet, but the hollow, echoing kind that makes every soft movement sound louder. She rubbed her wrist. The Why she always did when something felt wrong, her thumb moving in small circles that only made the unease more visible. She didn't know why she felt alone in a way she hadn't yesterday. She didn't know why the air felt heavier, why her heartbeat felt slightly off-tempo. She just knew something had shifted and she wasn't the one who moved it. I watched. From a distance that wasn't physical, wasn't intrusive, wasn't anything that could be measured. Just the quiet emotional vantage point of someone who finally understood the shape of things. I felt no triumph, no victory, no cruelty. Just a calm, steady release. The loop had broken, finally. Not with confrontation, not with confessions, not with some dramatic gesture. Just silence, the quiet withdrawal of presence. The subtle redirection of attention. She sat there on her couch, small and still, trying to understand a discomfort she couldn't articulate. And I stood on the other side of that silence, steady, untroubled, watching the understanding slowly bloom in the space between us, a space she had once kept so carefully, now turned into something she felt without knowing why. There was no regret in me, no longing, no anger. Just the cool satisfaction of clarity, a final calm settling where frustration once lived. She had her morning, I had my distance, and the silence between us was complete.